There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over the streets of Japan at night. It is a peaceful, orderly stillness. You can walk through the sprawling, neon-soaked arteries of Tokyo or the quiet, winding residential alleys of Kobe, bathed only in the hum of glowing vending machines, and feel an overwhelming sense of safety. It is a country famous for its incredibly low crime rate, a place where people leave their laptops unattended in cafes and children ride the subway alone. But if you wander long enough, you will inevitably pass a KOBN, a small neighborhood police station. And on the exterior walls of these stations, plastered behind glass display cases, are the faces of monsters. These are the National Police Agency's most wanted posters. The men staring out from these faded, weathered photographs are the architects of some of the most brutal, calculated, and terrifying crimes in the nation's modern history. Currently, there are 12 faces pinned to these boards, 12 phantoms, because these cases are rarely broadcast by Western media outlets. These fugitives exist as terrifying local secrets, locked behind geographical and linguistic borders. Today we are going to stare directly into the eyes of 4 of these men. We are going to examine the highest bounties, the coldest trails, and the darkest narratives hiding in the shadows of the safest country on earth. Because no matter how pristine the streets may be, every society breeds its own nightmares. Our first descent takes us back to 1998, to a quiet residential neighborhood in Gunma Prefecture. We are looking for fugitive number 1, Yoshi Koga. The bounty for his capture sits at 3 million yen. Koga was 28 years old, working as a delivery driver for a local transport logistics company. He was a quiet, awkward man, the kind of person who blends effortlessly into the background of everyday life. But beneath that unremarkable exterior brewed a toxic, deeply unstable obsession. Part of Koga's route involved dropping off supplies at a local drugstore twice a week. Working behind the counter was an 18-year-old girl. We will refer to her by her surname. To Ishii, Koga was just another face, a mundane part of her work routine. But to Koga, she became the center of his universe. He developed a severe, one-sided infatuation. The obsession escalated one evening when a mutual co-worker organized a casual group outing to a bowling alley. Ishii was there. Koga, normally silent and withdrawn, was uncharacteristically animated. He shadowed her. When Ishii casually mentioned that she enjoyed going for drives, Koga's eyes lit up. He immediately mirrored her, claiming he was a massive car enthusiast. It was a lie. Koga drove a completely ordinary, unremarkable commuter vehicle, but his desperation to impress her, to bind himself to her interests, was absolute. Days later, he proudly marched into the drugstore and announced he had just purchased a brand new, high-performance sports car, a white Nissan Silvia. He stared intently at Ishii, making sure she understood the unspoken message. He had bought the car entirely for her. Ishii felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The attention was suffocating, unsettling, but Koga was relentless. He badgered her for a date, cornering her with his demands. Anxious, and hoping that indulging him just once would finally satisfy his fixation and make him leave her alone, Ishii reluctantly agreed to a single dinner. It was a terrible mistake. The dinner was agonizing, but the doctor home was an exercise in pure psychological terror. When Koga finally got her into the passenger seat of his pristine Nissan Silvia, he didn't take her home. He drove in the exact opposite direction. He took her on a long, winding, deliberate detour through the darkened streets, locking her in a moving cage of metal and glass. Ishii sat frozen in the passenger seat, terrified of what he might do next. She survived that night, but the psychological siege had just begun. Ishii flatly refused any further contact. She rejected his invitations, but the word no did not exist in Koga's reality. He memorized her home address. He began lingering in the shadows outside her house. Her phone would ring at work, and when she answered, there was only the sound of heavy, stale breathing on the other end of the line. She would finish her shift only to find frantic, handwritten notes pinned beneath the windshield wipers of her car. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Koga abruptly quit his delivery job. He vanished from the drugstore. The phone calls ceased. Ishii breathed a massive sigh of relief, believing the nightmare had simply burned itself out. She was wrong. He wasn't moving on. He was gone. January 14th, 1998. The winter air in Takasaki City was bitterly cold. Ishii finished her day and returned to her family home. The house was dead quiet. She slipped off her shoes in the entryway and began walking toward the wooden staircase leading to the second floor. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the gloom. Koga lunged from behind a door near the entrance. He grabbed the terrified 18-year-old from behind, violently throwing her to the floor of an adjacent room and pinning her down. He leaned in close. "I really like you," he whispered. But Ishii wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at his clothes. His garments were heavily, darkly stained with crimson. The metallic, unmistakable scent of fresh blood hung thick in the air. Panic seized her throat. She stared at Koga's face, his arms, his hands. He was uninjured. The blood wasn't his. Ishii shared this home with her parents and her elderly grandmother. She screamed their names. The house remained utterly, terrifyingly silent. For 3 agonizing hours, Koga held her hostage on the floor. He kept her pinned, rambling about his twisted affection, forcing her to listen to his delusions while the blood of her family dried on his clothes. And then, as abruptly as the ambush had begun, Koga simply stood up, walked out the front door, and disappeared into the freezing winter night. Ishii scrambled up the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she reached the second floor hallway, she dropped to her knees. The floorboards were painted red. There was so much blood that she couldn't find a clean patch of wood to step on. Tucked away, shoved brutally into separate closets, she found the slaughtered remains of her mother, her father, and her grandmother. Koga fled in his pristine white Nissan Silvia, license plate Gunma 33 Mo 867. He was last spotted crossing the Tsusui Bridge, tearing towards Saitama Prefecture, and then he evaporated. Gunma Prefectural Police launched a massive nationwide manhunt, but the trail went ice cold. The white sports scar was never recovered. The years bled into decades. Yet, the investigation headquarters remains active, its walls heavily burdened with rows upon rows of thick case files. Usually, the passage of time is a fugitive's best friend. Memories fade, and public outrage cools. But Japan has a way of catching its ghosts. The statute of limitations for murder was abolished in 2010. If Koga is alive, he is 55 years old today. He is described as having a long face, a slender build, and a nervous habit of smelling his hands and biting his nails. He faces a civil penalty of over 150 million yen in compensation to the girl whose life he destroyed. But money is irrelevant. If the authorities ever drag Yoshi Koga out of the shadows, the Japanese justice system will almost certainly answer his butchery with the hangman's noose. Our second phantom is a different breed of predator. He does not hide in the shadows. He walks with an arrogant swagger in the broad daylight. Meet fugitive number 2, Yoichi Hata. The bounty on his head is a staggering 8 million yen. If you look at his poster, you might be confused. Hata doesn't look like a hardened killer. He has a soft, boyish face, stylish hair, and an almost delicate features. But behind that carefully manicured facade lies a terrifying psychological void. Hata possesses the classic traits of the dark triad: deep, pathological narcissism, pure psychopathy, and a Machiavellian desire to manipulate everyone around him. At 28 years old, Hat's adult life was a masterclass in parasitic behavior. He lived off welfare scams. He conned strangers on the street for cash. When he felt frustrated, he intentionally caused chaotic disturbances in restaurants and train stations, feeding off the distress of ordinary people. In early 2022, his malice escalated. He was convicted and handed a suspended prison sentence for the illegal confinement of a woman he had lured through a dating app. The justice system let him walk free, a fatal miscalculation. June 29th, 2022, the coastal city of Beppu in Oita Prefecture. To 19-year-old university students, who we will refer to simply as A and B, were enjoying a warm summer evening. They were riding their motorbikes between thrift stores, hunting for vintage clothing. They finished their shopping at a local department store and walked out to the parking lot to retrieve their bikes. As they strapped on their helmets, they noticed a young man strutting down the nearby sidewalk. He was blasting music from his smartphone at maximum volume. In a society that highly values public courtesy and quiet respect, it was an incredibly obnoxious, aggressive act. Student naturally glanced over, his brow furrowed in quiet annoyance. The man with the phone was Yoichi Hata, and Hata did not tolerate being looked at. Hata's fragile ego shattered instantly. He pointed a finger like a weapon at the 19-year-old and screamed, "What the hell are you looking at?" He aggressively marched over, berating the teenagers, lecturing them about walking their motorbikes toward the wrong parking lot exit. Student, recognizing the unhinged rage in Hata's eyes, decided to de-escalate. He politely bowed his head, apologized for staring, and kicked his motorbike into gear, riding away with his friend into the night. They drove down the prefectural road, stopping at a red traffic light about 400 meters away from the parking lot. As they idled waiting for the green light, they nervously chuckled about the bizarre, angry man they had just encountered. The altercation had lasted less than 3 minutes. They never heard the tires squeal. They only heard the roar of an engine accelerating to maximum RPM behind them. Hata had sprinted to his white mini car. He had tracked them down. As the teenagers sat utterly defenseless at the intersection, Hata drove his vehicle directly into their backs at 100 kilometers an hour. It was a missile strike. The impact launched the motorbikes and their riders into the air. Student's body was crushed. He was killed instantly upon impact. Student B suffered catastrophic, life-altering injuries but miraculously survived the pavement. Hata's vehicle lost control after the slaughter, violently careening into a concrete utility pole. The front end crumpled. Smoke hissed from the radiator. Hata didn't call an ambulance. He didn't check on the broken bodies bleeding out on the asphalt. He simply unbuckled his seatbelt, left his smartphone, his wallet, and even his shoes inside the wrecked cabin, and sprinted away on his bare feet. He vanished into the labyrinth of the city, eventually making his way toward a local yacht harbor about 2 kilometers away. Police later found his discarded shirt lying on the concrete near the dock, churning water of the seafront. From that moment on, Yoichi Hata ceased to exist. A national police agency eventually plastered his boyish face across the country. Bounty hunters swarmed. Over 9,000 tips flooded the hotlines. But Hata remains a ghost. Because his shirt was found at the water's edge, initial theories suggested he swam out to sea and drowned, but criminal analysts and internet sleuths vehemently disagree. They argue the shirt was a calculated prop. The yacht harbor is notorious for having a severe lack of CCTV cameras. Analysts theorize that Hata stripped off his shirt to change his profile, blending into the coastal darkness as a shirtless, late-night jogger. He was incredibly fit, a man obsessed with his physique, who once cycled for 10 hours straight across prefectural lines. He likely jogged the dark coastline straight back to his apartment, which sat near the water. There he could pack fresh clothes, grab hidden cash, and vanish onto a train before the sun even rose. And he had plenty of time to do it. The Ota prefectural police exhibited a level of incompetence that bordered on the surreal. Despite having Hata's wallet and sitting on the driver's seat of the murder weapon, it took investigators 2 full days to visit his home address. 2 days. By the time they knocked on his door, he could have been anywhere in the Japanese archipelago. When investigative journalist Slater demanded to see the initial police reports, the department handed over documents that were entirely redacted. Solid blocks of black ink. A silent admission of their catastrophic failure. How does a young man hide in a modern society? In Japan, it is chillingly easy. Wearing surgical masks in public is completely ubiquitous. Hata, deeply vain and experienced with cosmetics, could easily alter his appearance, perhaps even living his life disguised as a woman. He has no moral compass regarding theft, a crime easily committed in a high-trust society. Before the murder, he even boasted on social media that his grand plan for life was to never work, but to simply steal what he needed. But the most agonizing aspect of this case is not the escape. It is the charge itself. The Ota police have currently enlisted Yoichi Hata as a wanted fugitive for a road traffic violation. Hit and run. They have stubbornly refused to upgrade the charge to murder. Their reasoning: they claim they cannot definitively prove Hata had murderous intent when he drove a two-ton vehicle into the backs of two stationary teenagers at 100 kilometers an hour. A traffic violation carries a statute of limitations of 7 years. If the charge is not changed, Hatter can simply hide in the shadows until the clock runs out, step back into the light, and face absolutely zero legal consequences for slaughtering a 19-year-old boy. Hatter's own grandfather smugly told reporters that when the statute expires, he will welcome his grandson home with open arms. There is evidence that Hatter planned this exact loophole. While in jail months prior for his kidnapping charge, he was overheard consulting with an inmate connected to the Yakuza. Hatter asked how to get away with killing someone during an argument. The gangster's advice was chillingly precise. Doctor your car into them. It'll be treated as a traffic accident. The family of Studenta is fighting a desperate, agonizing battle against the ticking clock in the stubborn police department. A young man with a dream to visit all 47 prefectures with his best friend was robbed of his future over a perceived slight about loud music. And the boyish monster who did it is still out there, staring into a mirror somewhere, waiting for his time to run out. We leave the coastal roads and plunge into the blinding neon and concrete canyons of Tokyo's underworld. Fugitive number 3, Shinichi Mitate. The bounty, 6 million yen. Shinichi Mitate is a terrifying paradox. He was raised in a stable, loving family. He possesses a certified genius level IQ of 145. He was an avid reader, the quiet president of his school's broadcasting club. But beneath the intellect lay a pitch-black, rotting core. Mitate was a born psychopath. Behind closed doors, his favorite hobby was torture. He spent his youth capturing stray cats, throwing them into oncoming traffic, or meticulously dismembering them with a kitchen knife while they were still breathing. He quickly realized the structured world of academia bored him. He wanted power, and he wanted to inflict pain. He dropped out of high school, diving headfirst into Tokyo's violent delinquent culture. Mitate was a natural predator. He formed his own crew, the Yaifuku Black Empress, and violently absorbed other gangs until he resurrected the Kanto Rengo, a legendary, ultra-violent motorcycle gang that had been fading into obscurity. Under Mitate's genius and absolute lack of empathy, the Kanto Rengo morphed into a terrifying extortion syndicate. The old rules of the underworld meant nothing to him. Traditional Yakuza didn't target civilians. Mitate didn't care. He blackmailed businessmen, kidnapped women, and tortured rivals by pulling out their teeth and fingernails with pliers simply to hear them scream. The streets gave him a moniker that fit perfectly, the Prince of Cruelty. He lived like dark royalty, hoarding cash from extortion rackets, sharing a luxury penthouse with a German trophy wife and their child. But in March of 2008, the prince's pride was wounded. One of his loyal Kanto Rengo lieutenants was brutally beaten to death in the streets of Shinwocha. The word on the street pointed to the Kansai-based gangsters known as the Kaimura brothers. Mitate swore absolute, bloody vengeance. He waited patiently for years. Sunday, September 2nd, 2012. 3:0 m. A whisper reached Mitate's ear. One of the Kaimura brothers had been spotted drinking in the VIP section of Studio Flower, a pulse, crowded nightclub in Roppongi, Tokyo's infamous nightlife district. Mitate mobilized immediately. He and 11 of his most ruthless enforcers descended on the club. They pulled thick black balaclavas over their faces and gripped heavy, metal baseball bats. They stormed through the heavy doors, pushing through the terrified, screaming crowd, making a beeline for the VIP booths. They found their targets sitting on the leather couches. Without a word, the 12 men descended on him, raining down bone-shattering blows with the metal bats, bludgeoning the man to death in front of hundreds of traumatized witnesses. But Mitate's genius had failed him. It was a catastrophic case of mistaken identity. The man lying dead in the VIP booth was 31-year-old Ryosuke Fujimoto, a completely innocent man, a civilian with absolutely zero ties to the criminal underworld, and no connection to the Kaimura brothers. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police cracked down with furious, unprecedented force. 18 members of the Kanto Rengo were hunted down and thrown into prison. But when they kicked down the door to the luxury penthouse, the prince was gone. Mitate had vanished into the underground, utilizing a network of devoted mistresses. One woman, a cabaret hostess known only as M-chan, smuggled him between safe houses, inching merchant Hachode. Metate possessed an eerie, hypnotic charisma. Former associates described it as a serpent-like gaze that completely brainwashed the women around him. They noted that after dating Metate for a year, his girlfriends would adopt the exact same dead, reptilian, emotional stare that he possessed. Funded by millions of yen in hidden extortion money, Metate slipped out of Japan just a week after the slaughter. Intelligence suggests he fled to the Philippines, dissolving into the crowded slums and remote islands of the archipelago, shielded by expatriate criminal syndicates. Former gang executives have warned the police not to underestimate him. Metate is incredibly wealthy, flawlessly prepared, and possesses the intellect to stay 10 steps ahead of an international manhunt. But the ghost still haunts Japan. Immigration records suggest Metate secretly smuggled himself back into the country via a maritime route from Thailand in 2013, allegedly to unearth buried caches of extorted caches. Eyewitnesses from the underground claim he has heavily surgically altered his face, growing out his hair and a thick beard to completely erase the prints of cruelty from existence. In 2024, authorities raided an abandoned luxury condo overlooking Manila Bay, a heavily populated expatriate hub. They found evidence Metate had been living there under a forged identity, but he had slipped the net once again. Whispers in the dark web suggest Metate is bored of Southeast Asia. Authorities heavily suspect he has already smuggled himself back into Japan, hiding in plain sight in the sprawling concrete jungles of Tokyo, Saitama, or Miyagi. Perhaps he is waiting for the real Kane Mora brothers to be released from prison so he can finally finish the bloody job he started a decade ago. Our fourth and final fugitive takes us down a psychological rabbit hole so twisted, so thick with paranoia and alleged conspiracy, it will make your head spin. You need to pay very close attention to the names. Fugitive number 4. Katsuyuzi Obara. The bounty, 3 million yen. June 28, 2008. The rural quiet of Kurihara City in northern Japan. 17-year-old Kozu Soto was lounging in her apartment with her partner. Let's refer to her as Sotobi. At 10:20 p.m., Sotobi's cell phone rang. It was a 28-year-old man named Katsuyuzi Obara. Obara was the boyfriend of Sotobi's absolute best friend. And here is the crucial, tragic detail of the story. Sotobi's best friend was also named Kozo Sato. We will call her Sato. Obara's voice was tense over the phone. He begged Sotobi to come meet him. I need to talk to you about getting back together with my ex, he pleaded, referencing Soto. Sotobi sighed, threw on a jacket, and headed for the door. She turned to her partner and smiled, making a dark, offhand joke. My friend's boyfriend needs relationship advice. They must have had a fight. I might be killed. If I am, they'll call you, okay? She walked out into the humid summer night. At 10:43 p.m., the glowing security cameras of a local 7-Eleven captured Sotobi standing alone in the magazine aisle. Casually flipping through a book, she stood there for 17 minutes. That grainy footage is the last time Kozo Sotobi was ever seen alive. The timeline then shatters into a chaotic, bloody sequence of events. A few hours later, in the dead of night, Obara was spotted on security cameras at a self-service gas station. He was alone. Wrapped tightly around his right hand was a blood-soaked white cloth. The next morning, Obara showed up at his younger brother's house. His right hand was so severely mangled, he couldn't even hold chopsticks to eat his breakfast. 2 days later, on July 1st, the nightmare became real. The battered, lifeless body of 17-year-old Sotobi was found face down in a shallow mountain stream in Kawai village. The autopsy revealed a horrifying end. She had been brutally strangled, then dropped from a high bridge, suffering a massive, skull-crushing blow upon impacting the rocks below. 5 hours after her body was pulled from the water, a solitary fisherman was driving down an isolated mountain road. He slammed on his brakes. Wrapped around a utility pole was a crumpled, smoking car. Sitting inside the wreck was Obara. The fisherman rushed over, asking how he could have possibly crashed on a perfectly straight, empty road. Obara stared straight ahead, his eyes wide and vacant. I fought with a woman and hit her, he babbled uncontrollably. I'm finished. I have no choice but to die." The bewildered fisherman drove the rambling man back to his parents' house. The next morning, Obara set his final arrangements in motion. He sent an email to Satoa, containing a photo of the towering, jagged-on OSU cliffs, with the text, "This is the end." He emailed his brother, "Goodbye. Sorry for causing you so much trouble." A frantic friend raced his motorcycle to the cliffs and found Obara sitting on the sheer edge, talking quietly on his cell phone, believing Obara was negotiating with the police. And assuming his friend was too much of a coward to actually jump, the motorcyclist inexplicably turned around and left. The next day, authorities found Obara's wallet, his sandals, his car keys, and his removed SIM card sitting neatly on the edge of the abyss. When they searched his crashed vehicle, they found strands of Sotheby's hair resting on the back seat. The police narrative was instantly cemented. Obara had lured the teenager out, strangled her in his car, dumped her off the bridge, and then driven to the cliffs to end his own life. But marine units dragged the ocean for hundreds of meters. They found no body, no clothes, no physical evidence that anyone had impacted the water. The police concluded it was a theatrical ruse. Obara had faked his suicide and fled. A bounty was placed on his head. Case closed. Until a freelance journalist named Okio Kuroki stepped into the fray. Kuroki began pulling at the loose threads of the official police narrative, and what unraveled was a terrifying story of Yakuza extortion, mistaken identity, and a massive, alleged police cover-up. Kuroki revealed that Obara was a violent, abusive coward. A year prior, Obara had quit a difficult construction job provided by a senior colleague, a dangerous, connected man known only as Mr. Husband. Why? Furious at the disrespect, Mr. Respect, Y invited Obara to his home. The meeting was a trap. Mr. Y unsheated a razor-sharp katana and shoved the steel blade directly into Obara's mouth. He demanded 2 million yen in compensation. "If you can't pay," the Yakuza hissed, "leave your finger behind." Mr. Y then demanded a guarantor, someone who would pay the debt in cash or in blood. Trembling, bleeding profusely from a freshly severed pinky finger, Obara scribbled down a name and a phone number. He didn't write his own family. He wrote the name of his 16-year-old girlfriend, Kunzu Sato. Sotoma. Obara and Sato fled to the local police station and filed a formal complaint against Mr. Y. Obara then went into hiding, but the Yakuza never stops hunting. Mr. Y flooded internet message boards with Obara's face, offering bounties. Word reached Obara in the underground. "If Y finds you, HE's going to kill you." Terrified, Obara decided to completely surrender. On June 28th, the exact day Sotobi vanished, Obara frantically called Satoa. He begged her to go to the police station with him to withdraw their criminal complaint against the Yakuza. Satoa, utterly exhausted by the abuse and the danger, refused to answer his calls. She was done with him. Panicking, out of gas, and out of time, Obara called her best friend, Satobi. He begged her to intervene. Journalist Okio Kuroki presented a chilling, alternative timeline to the public. Obara didn't kill Satobi. He met her at the convenience store, begged for her help, and left. Sometime after that meeting, the Yakuza struck. Mr. Y.'s enforcers snatched the girl wandering home in the dark. They were looking to extract the blood debt from the guarantor Obara had named, a girl named Kozo Sato. They didn't realize there were two of them. They murdered the wrong girl. Kuroki pointed out glaring inconsistencies in the police theory. Medical records proved Obara's hand was so severely mutilated on the morning of June 28 that doctors stated he literally lacked the physical grip strength to strangle a human being. Furthermore, the Iwate Prefectural Police vehemently denied ever receiving the initial extortion complaint about Mr. Y, despite Obara's family insisting it was filed. If Kuroki's theory was true, the police had ignored a Yakuza death threat, resulting in the brutal murder of an innocent 17-year-old girl. The scandal would destroy the department. So, Kuroki alleged, the police framed the cowardly, fleeing boyfriend to bury their own fatal incompetence. Obara, realizing he was being hunted by the Yakuza and framed by the cops, drove to the cliffs, left his shoes, and vanished into the mountains. It was a brilliant, explosive piece of investigative journalism. It was gaining massive national traction. And then on November 2nd, 2010, journalist Takeo Kuroki was found dead. He was discovered slumped inside his parked car. The official cause of death: carbon monoxide poisoning, an apparent suicide. The online true crime community exploded. Was the journalist silenced for getting too close to the truth? If Obara walked away from those cliffs barefoot, did he really survive a trek through the unforgiving wilderness, or was he intercepted by Mr. Huston? Y.S. Men. Is the fugitive the police saw hunting actually buried in a shallow, unmarked grave deep in the Iwate Mountains? 17 years have passed. Kozo Satobi has now been dead for as long as she was allowed to live. The police refuse to acknowledge the ghosts. They insist Katsuyoshi Obara is a murderer, a mastermind who faked his death, and is currently drawing breath somewhere in the world. His face remains plastered on the KOBN walls. For men, for empty spaces in the world, whether they are hiding in plain sight, living under the knife of a plastic surgeon, or rotting in the earth, their faces continue to watch over the quiet, safe streets of Japan. Sleep well. Welcome, listeners. Step into the dark, draw the curtains, and let the noise of the outside world fall away. Think for a moment about the photographs sitting in your home, the digital galleries on your phone, the faded Polaroids tucked into showboxes. We use cameras to capture joy, to freeze a perfect, fleeting second in time. A family laughing, a group of friends sharing a drink, a radiant smile. But a photograph only tells you the truth of a single fraction of a second. It cannot show you the heavy, suffocating silence of what happens after the flash fades. It cannot capture the predator standing just outside the frame, and it cannot warn the smiling subject that they are looking into the lens for the very last time. Tonight, we delve into two separate nightmares that are tethered together by the haunting legacy of the final photograph. Two stories where the boundary between absolute normalcy and profound, unfathomable violence was crossed in the blink of an eye. Our first descent into the dark takes us back to the bustling, fast-paced streets of 1982's London. The year is 1986. The setting is Fulham, a vibrant, affluent district in West London where the real estate market is moving at a breakneck speed. Amidst this chaotic, ambitious environment was a 25-year-old woman named Susie Lamport. Susie was a force of nature, born into a tight-knit, deeply loving family. Her three siblings described her as the absolute center of gravity in any room. She was energetic, fiercely sociable, and carried an adventurous spirit that infected everyone around her husband. She loved to travel, she was athletic, and she maintained the kind of busy, vibrant social calendar that defines your mid-20s. Susie was employed as an estate agent for a prestigious firm called Sturgis & Sons. Because she was striking, charismatic, and incredibly personable, her manager routinely positioned her desk right near the front window of the office. She was the welcoming face of the business, a bright beacon to attract potential clients walking down the pavement. The morning of July 28th, 1996, began like any other ordinary Monday. Susie arrived at the office, a cup of coffee in hand, ready to tackle a busy schedule of property viewings. She flipped open her diary, scanning the appointments. But one entry, scrawled in her handwriting, stood out from the rest. At 12:45 p.m., she was scheduled to show a vacant residential property at 37 Shore Olds Road. The name of the prospective buyer, recorded from a prior telephone conversation, was listed simply as Mr. Kipper. In the United Kingdom, a kipper is a smoked herring, but in the gritty lexicon of British street slang, the phrase "to be done up like a kipper" carries a dark, specific meaning. It means to be severely cheated, to be tricked, to be taken advantage of by someone who has laid a trap. In the bright light of the office, surrounded by her colleagues, Susie likely chuckled at the bizarre surname. It was a quirk of the job, a funny anecdote to share over drinks later that evening. She grabbed her keys, gathered her paperwork, and stepped out into the mild London air. At around midday, Susie climbed into her white Ford Fiesta, turned the ignition, and drove towards Shore Olds Roads. She was driving directly into an abyss. A vacant house is a strange, liminal space, It is a structure devoid of life, echoing with the hollow sound of footsteps on bare floorboards. It is an environment built for isolation. According to eyewitness testimony, Susie arrived at the property shortly before her scheduled appointment time, but the quiet routine of unlocking a front door and waiting for a client was immediately shattered. A neighbor, living just next door to the property, happened to glance out of their window at approximately 1:00 p.m. They saw Susie standing outside the house on the pavement, but she wasn't alone, and she wasn't engaging in polite, professional conversation. She was locked in a heated, visible argument with a man. The neighbor provided a chillingly specific description of the stranger, which would later form the basis of a police identikit. The man was tall. He possessed dark, slicked back hair, swept away from his face. He appeared to be somewhere between 25 and 30 years old, and he was dressed immaculately in a sharp, charcoal gray suit. He looked like a wealthy professional, a man who belonged in a high-end estate agency. A third witness corroborating the scene reported seeing the exact same smartly dressed man talking with Susie outside the home. But this witness noticed a bizarre, incredibly unsettling detail. Cradled in the man's hands was a bottle of champagne, heavily decorated with thick, festive ribbons. Was the champagne a prop? A calculated tool designed to disarm a young woman? A psychological weapon to make him appear harmless, celebratory, and charming? Whatever transpired on that pavement, the timeline begins to fracture shortly after. At roughly 2:45 p.m., a close, personal friend of Susie S. named Barbara Whitfield was walking along Fulham Palace Road. She glanced at the traffic and immediately recognized Susie S. white Ford Fiesta driving north. Barbara smiled and waved enthusiastically at the passing car. But Susie never saw her. Barbara noticed that Susie was deeply engrossed in a conversation with a man sitting in the passenger seat of her vehicle. The car sped past, disappearing into the chaotic flow of London traffic. Back at the Sturgeson Sons office, the afternoon stretched on. Colleagues initially brushed off Susie's absence, assuming the viewing at Shorolds Road had simply run long, or that the client had requested to see a second property. But as the clock ticked past 3:00 p.m., then 4:00 p.m., the atmosphere in the office shifted from casual assumption to gnawing, icy dread. Susie was a professional. She did not simply vanish during work hours without calling in. At 4:30 p.m., a panicked colleague drove to 37 Shorolds Road. They found the property completely empty. The doors were locked. The house was silent. By 5:30 p.m., the police were formally notified. A 25-year-old woman had vanished into thin air in the middle of the day. As dusk fell over London, casting long shadows across the brick facades, the first physical piece of the nightmare was discovered. Susie's white Ford Fiesta was found abandoned on Stevenage Road, roughly a mile and a half from the property viewing. The scene inside the vehicle was a forensic puzzle that screamed of a sudden, forced disruption. The driver's side door was entirely unlocked. The handbrake had not been pulled up, and, most chillingly, the driver's seat had been pushed violently back on its tracks, shoved much further back than the petite, energetic Susie would have ever required to reach the pedals. Someone much taller had been sitting behind that wheel. Resting quietly inside the car was Susie's purse. It had not been a robbery. But there was absolutely no trace of Susie Lamplugh. As the investigation launched into a frantic, high-gear manhunt, a terrifying new witness account emerged from the shadows of Stevenage Road. A local resident came forward, claiming they had seen a dark-colored vehicle driving aggressively south along that very road around the time Susie evaporated. As the dark car sped past, the witness caught a fleeting glimpse through the glass. Inside the vehicle was a woman matching Susie's exact physical description. She was violently honking the horn of the car, and her face was contorted into an expression the witness could not definitively decipher. She was either laughing hysterically, or she was screaming in absolute, unadulterated terror. The police cast a massive net. They rigorously interrogated Susie's boyfriend and her male flatmate, definitively ruling both men out. Dozens of potential suspects were dragged into the blinding light of the interrogation room, only to be dismissed when their alibis held firm. But from the murky, criminal underbelly of the city, a true monster eventually stepped into the crusheress. His name was John Cannon. John Cannon was not a stranger to the dark. He was a convicted, predatory sex offender. In the months leading up to Susie's disappearance, the prison system had granted Cannon day release privileges, allowing a known predator to walk the streets of London before returning to his cell at night. The circumstantial evidence forming around Cannon was heavy and deeply disturbing. While serving his time, Cannon would frequently boast to his fellow inmates about his exploits on day release. He bragged about meeting a beautiful young woman at a local wine bar. He told the prisoners her name was Susie. Detectives interviewing Susie's co-workers uncovered a deeply unsettling detail that had occurred just days before she vanished. A completely anonymous, mysterious admirer had sent a massive, striking bouquet of blood-red roses directly to the estate agency, addressed to Susie. John Cannon had a well-documented, psychological signature. He was known to stalk women who caught his eye, and his preferred method of initial contact was sending them unsolicited deliveries of red roses. The timeline tightened around his neck like a noose. Cannon was officially released from prison a mere 3 days before Susie disappeared. He was documented to be roaming the Fulham area. Furthermore, a witness placed a man bearing a striking resemblance to Cannon standing on the pavement outside Sturgis & Sons on the very day of the abduction, his eyes peering hungrily through the glass window, directly at the desk where Susie was strategically positioned to attract clients. And then came the absolute, undeniable psychological link. When detectives interviewed Cannon's former prison acquaintances, they asked if the man went by any aliases or street names. The inmates nodded. They told the police that behind bars, John Cannon was universally known by a simple, distinct nickname. Gibber. The man who booked the appointment that lured Susie to her doom called himself Mr. Gibber. Despite the overwhelming avalanche of circumstantial connections, the British legal system requires a smoking gun. The police had no body, no murder weapon, and no physical evidence tying Cannon to the empty house on Shore Olds Road. Without enough to charge him, Cannon remained free to roam the streets. And a predator never stops hunting. In 1987, a year after Susie was swallowed by the dark, Cannon joined a video dating agency, operating under the incredibly mundane alias John Peterson. The VHS profile video he filmed for the agency is a terrifying artifact of sociopathic detachment. Sitting in front of the camera, wearing a calm, polite facade, he speaks directly to the women he is trying to lure. Yes, I have a dislike of inflated egos, Cannon says softly into the microphone. People who look at me like I'm great. I don't like that. I can't handle that sort of inner weakness. I just like normal, average people. When the off-camera interviewer asks him about his sense of humor, Cannon offers a chillingly precise self-assessment. I'm a little bit dry as regards to humor. He smirks slightly. Yeah, that's how it is. Mainly dry humor. His definition of dry humor was actually a manifestation of pure, psychopathic sadism. Just a few short weeks after recording that tape, John Cannon stalked, abducted, and brutally murdered a 29-year-old woman named Shirley Banks in Bristol. He transported her lifeless body into the dense, ancient woodlands of the Quantock Hills. He dumped her remains at a specific, remote geographic site. The location he chose was not an accident. It was a sick, twisted punchline to a joke only he understood. The site was historically known as Dead Woman's Ditch. When the authorities finally cornered and arrested Cannon for the murder of Shirley Banks, they tore apart his life. Inside his luxury BMW, they found the tools of a professional predator, an imitation handgun, and a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. When they breached his personal garage, they found Shirley's stolen car. But Cannon hadn't just hidden the vehicle. He had unscrewed the original license plates and attached a set of fake, counterfeit plates. The alphanumeric sequence on the fake plates read, SLP 300 Itexus seconds. To the detective staring at the metal, the code was a screaming, undeniable confession. Susie and Amplor. Property. 3. Itexus the year she vanished. Yes. It was a trophy. A sick, arrogant badge of honor bolted to the car of his latest victim, openly mocking the police who had failed to catch him the first time. When detectives slammed the license plate onto the interrogation table and demanded an explanation, Kennan's arrogance was breathtaking. He smoothly lied, claiming he had purchased the vehicle from a businessman on the black market. He casually mentioned that this mysterious businessman was no doubt responsible for the slayings of Susie Shirley and another woman, and that this phantom figure was now in a great deal of trouble. The other woman Kennan referenced was Sandra Gould, a 27-year-old office worker brutally murdered in Bournemouth in 1996. Kennan was inserting himself into the narrative of multiple unsolved homicides, playing an infuriating game of cat and mouse with the detectives. While he successfully evaded official charges force and Gould Susie Lampard, the evidence for Shirley Banks was insurmountable. John Kennan was convicted of murder and slammed with a life sentence. As the heavy iron doors of the prison shut behind him, he reportedly smirked and stated that there were one or two things he was never caught for. Decades later, advancements in forensic technology allowed scientists to extract a microscopic trace of DNA belonging to Susie Lampard from deep within the upholstery of Kennan's vehicle, but the courts deemed it insufficient to override the burden of proof required for a murder trial after so much time had passed. He was never formally charged. The senior investigating officer who dedicated his life to the case would later go on the record, stating with absolute, unwavering certainty that John Kennan was makers. Richard Spottis Wood, known to the criminal underbelly simply as Spotty, and his girlfriend, Lucy Byrne, had rented a caravan for a relaxing weekend getaway. In a spontaneous gesture of supposed goodwill, Richard picked up his mobile phone and invited his friend and employee, 24-year-old Darren Bonner, to join them by the sea. Darren, affectionately known to his friends as Zippy, was a young man existing on the absolute margins of society. He worked at a harsh, greasy auto garage owned entirely by Richard. The power dynamic between the two men was absolute and deeply exploitative. Richard paid the young man a pathetic, crushing wage of just $25 a day. In exchange for this grueling labor, Richard generously allowed Darren to live in a squalid, cramped mobile home parked on the dirty concrete directly outside the mechanic shop. But fixing cars was merely a front. Behind the oil stains and the heavy garage doors, Richard Spottis Wood was a dangerous man. He was the architect of a massive, highly lucrative, and deeply illegal cannabis farming operation. The rumors on the street were that Richard paid Darren under the table, forcing the vulnerable young man to tend to the illicit crops, pulling him deeper into a world of severe criminal consequence. But this weekend in Northumberland wasn't about the drug trade. It was a holiday, a chance to drink, laugh, and forget the grime of the garage. From July 7th to July 9th, the trio seemingly enjoyed the picturesque coastline. They drank heavily, socialized in the cramped living quarters of the caravan, and watched the tides roll in. At exactly 1:00 am on the morning of July 10th, the three of them squeezed together on the narrow sofa of the caravan. They held up a smartphone and took a selfie. Look closely at the image in your mind. The flash illuminates their faces. They are smiling. They look like three friends, exhausted by alcohol and sea air, without a single care in the world. But the smiles are a liar. Within hours of that flash, the thin veneer of friendship would collapse into an abyss of horrific, tortuous violence. The sun rose over the rocky Northumberland coast. At just past 8:00 am, an early morning walker was enjoying the crisp air, strolling along a rugged path bordered by an old, ancient stone wall. As he walked, his ears picked up a strange, unsettling sound. It was a heavy, wet, guttural noise. The walker later described it to the police as the sound of loud snoring. But it wasn't rhythmic or peaceful. It was the horrific, ragged sound of a human body fighting desperately for oxygen. The walker cautiously approached the stone wall and peered over the edge into the brush. What he saw froze the blood in his veins. Dug directly into the cold, damp earth was an open, shallow grave. Lying at the bottom of the dirt trench was 24-year-old Darren Bonner. He was curled tightly into the fetal position, his knees pulled to his chest in a desperate attempt to conserve body heat. He had been violently stripped completely naked. He was shivering uncontrollably, his skin pale and bruised, his consciousness hanging by an invisible thread. The walker frantically dialed emergency services. When paramedics pulled the young man from the dirt, the sheer brutality of the attack became horrible to see clear. Wrapped entirely around Darren's neck was a thick, angry, prominent red ligature mark. His torso was a canvas of deep, black and purple contusions. The doctors at the trauma center were horrified. Darren had suffered catastrophic blunt force trauma, but the true killer was the oxygen deprivation. The violent strangulation, combined with the agonizing, prolonged exposure to the freezing coastal night air, had inflicted absolute, irreversible brain damage. For 16 agonizing days, Darren lay in a hospital bed attached to life support. The nursing staff, awed by his sheer will to survive such catastrophic injuries, nicknamed the young man Lionheart. But the damage was too profound. 16 days after being pulled from the earth, Darren Bonner's heart finally stopped. The police did not have to search hard for suspects. The trail led directly from the open grave to the door of the Cresswell Towers caravan park. The last of people seen with Darren were Richard Spot, his wooden Lucy Byrne. 3 days after the walker found Darren, detectives descended upon South Tyneside to bring the couple in for questioning. Richard did not cooperate. The moment he spotted the police cruisers, he slammed his foot on the accelerator, initiating a terrifying, high-speed chase through the streets. Realizing his vehicle was outmatched, Richard slammed the brakes, abandoned the car in the middle of the road, and fled on foot into the dense brush. He didn't make it far. The fierce, relentless barking of a police canine unit echoed through the trees, tracking his scent directly to a thick bush, where the architect of the drug ring was found cowering in the dirt. Sitting in the sterile, fluorescent light of the interrogation room, Richard immediately began spinning a web of calculated, arrogant lies. He leaned back in his chair and scoffed at the detectives. He claimed that he and Darren were thick as thieves, best mates. He swore the atmosphere in the caravan was jubilant, pointing to the $1 selfie as absolute proof of their unbreakable bond. According to Richard's first narrative, Don had simply gotten drunk, wandered off into the dark Northumberland night to clear his head, and vanished. Richard played the role of the offended, grieving friend, absolutely outraged that the police would dare to accuse him of harming his employee. The detectives let him talk. They let him build his fragile house of cards. And then they produced the evidence that burned it to the ground. Realizing his wandering off story was dead on arrival, Richard pivoted. He concocted a new, infinitely more bizarre fiction. He leaned across the metal table and lowered his voice, telling the police a secret. He claimed that Darren was secretly dealing illegal, stolen firearms. According to Richard, Darren had smuggled a highly illegal Zono shotgun into the caravan park. In the middle of the night, Darren had demanded they walk out into the brush to dig a deep hole to stash the weapon. Richard, playing the loyal friend, graciously offered to help him dig. But while standing at the edge of the hole, Richard claimed Doran suddenly went mad, becoming physically violent and attacking him. Richard swore he merely defended himself, throwing a single, lucky punch that accidentally knocked Doran unconscious, causing him to tumble backward into the grave. When the detectives, staring at him in disbelief, asked why Richard had methodically stripped the unconscious man completely naked, Richard offered a pathetic shrug. "I panicked," he muttered. When asked to produce the phantom shotgun, Richard claimed he had driven it back to his garage, but some unknown thief had conveniently broken in and stolen it. The detectives had heard enough. They slammed the thick manila folder onto the table, overflowing with empirical, undeniable forensic truth. They had extensive CCTV footage showing Richard's specific van driving directly to the remote gravesite in the dead of night. They had crime scene photographs showing the interior of the rented caravan utterly destroyed, the walls and furniture bearing the unmistakable signs of a violent, desperate struggle for life. But the final nail in the coffin was found inside Richard's own vehicle. Stashed in the back of Richard's van were the clothes that had been stripped from Doran Ness's body. Hidden alongside them was Doran Ness's mobile phone, which had been intentionally, physically disassembled to prevent GPS tracking. And resting neatly in the glove box was a crisp, printed receipt. A receipt for a heavy-duty, steel-timed garden fork, the exact tool used to carve the shallow grave out of the hard coastal earth. The truth, as pieced together by the prosecutors, was a narrative of cold-blooded, cartel-style execution. Richard had grown intensely paranoid regarding his cannabis empire. He had convinced himself that his vulnerable, underpaid employee was actually a spy, secretly feeding intelligence to a rival, violent drug gang. That night in the caravan, fueled by paranoia and rage, Richard decided to make an agonizing example of the 24-year-old. The forensic autopsy painted a picture of absolute savagery. Richard had beaten Doran mercilessly. He struck the young man no less than 12 times across the back with a heavy, solid, rod-shaped weapon. He then locked his thick arms around Doran Ness's neck in a vice-like headlock, strangling the boy with such sustained, horrifying force that the tiny blood vessels in Doran Ness's face literally burst under the pressure. And what of Lucy Byrne, the smiling girlfriend in the photograph? Initially, she played the fool, but facing the terrifying prospect of a murder charge, she flipped. She took the stand as a witness for the prosecution. She testified that she had been jolted awake in the early hours of July 10th by the sound of a horrific, violent road tearing the caravan apart. She looked at the jury and delivered a chilling quote. She testified that she had never seen her boyfriend look so evil. Lucy swore she did not witness the actual murder. However, she detailed the agonizing drive the following morning. As they fled the resort, Richard aggressively forbade her from looking into the rear compartment of the van. At one point, he pulled the heavy vehicle over to the side of the road, dangerously close to the stone wall where the walker would later find the body. Lucy testified that Richard dragged a massive, heavy object out of the back doors, disappearing into the coastal brush for 10 long minutes. When he returned to the driver's seat, he was drenched in a thick, feverish sweat. The police and the public harbored deep, lingering doubts regarding Lucy's innocence. It is difficult to fathom sleeping through an execution in a space the size of a tin can. Ultimately, the Crown determined there was insufficient evidence to prove she physically participated in the killing. The murder charge was dropped. She pleaded guilty to assisting an offender, and was sentenced to a mere 30 months in prison. Richard Spot-Iswood faced the full fury of the law. He was convicted of Doran Ness's murder and slammed with a life sentence, mandated to serve a minimum of 22 years behind bars. The court ruled that they could not definitively prove premeditation. They classified the murder as a spontaneous explosion of violence resulting from an argument. But if you look at the timeline, a darker, far more terrifying theory emerges from the dirt. 3 days before the trip to the coast, Doran made a panicked phone call to his ex-girlfriend Donna. His voice was laced with pure terror. He told her, "I've fallen out with Spotty. He's gonna do me in. He's going to kill me." Doran was terrified. He was actively packing his bags, preparing to flee the town entirely. But later that exact same afternoon, Richard pulled up in his vehicle and offered the young man a ride to the holiday resort. Why did Doran get in the car? Did he believe he had been forgiven? Did the offer of a holiday convince him the threat was over? Or did he look at Richard and realize he simply had no choice but to obey? Here is the detail that keeps investigators awake at night. Forensic archaeologists analyzed the shallow grave dug near the stone wall. The earth was hard compacted and filled with thick roots and rocks. They calculated that it would have taken a man of Richard's physical size roughly 1 full hour of grueling, continuous labor to dig a hole that size using a garden fork. But the CCTV footage tracking Richard's van in the middle of the night shows a very tight window of time. Too tight to beat a man near to death, strip him, drag him, and spend 60 minutes digging a hole before fleeing. Unless the hole was already waiting for him. What if Richard had driven to the coast earlier in the weekend, walked out into the brush, and methodically dug the grave while Doran was back at the caravan? If that theory holds true, it changes everything. It means the murder wasn't spontaneous. It means that, at exactly what? Daroam, when the three of them crowded together on that narrow sofa, pressing their faces together for the camera. Richard knew exactly what he was about to do. He smiled for the lens, wrapping his arm around a young man he knew was mere hours away from being thrown naked into a hole in the earth. If that is true, the photograph does not capture a normal moment turning dark. It captures the terrifying, cold-blooded creation of an alibi, a monster smiling with his prey, ensuring the world saw them as best friends right before he turned off the flash and turned out the lights forever. Thank you for listening. Keep your doors locked. Watch the shadows, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous place you can be is right beside the person holding the camera. Good night.